Hey viewers, my name's Cara. Today I want to talk about experience as it relates to our worldview and how our experience sort of informs our worldview, and this is related to a discussion of power. So in the reclaiming tradition, which you can read about in Starhawk's books, Starhawk was one of the initial people involved in the founding of the tradition that became to be known as reclaiming. They talk about different definitions of power, talking about power over, having power over other people, power with, power that exists in collaboration with the power of other people, power with other people, power from within, your own power, and different sorts of distinctions like that. There are also some similar discussions had in Cakes for the Queen of Heaven, which you may have seen in a recent Vlogstis video of mine. It's by Shirley and Ranck. It is based on the 10-part series. It was a course that was taught in Unitarian Universalist churches over time, and then this is the book that is the compilation of that. I was reading through this, I just started it recently. I was reading through this and it talks about a similar discussion of power, and then that got me thinking about something related to experience. So I want to read you this passage from the book. It's on page 51 of my copy. It's from chapter 3, Reclaiming Our Power as Women, and it's quoting a book. So, a quote within a quote here. Quote, "In Toward a New Psychology of Women, Jean Baker Miller makes an important distinction between power for ourselves and power over others. Our male-dominated society has tended to define power as power over others, the ability to control. Someone else's power, then, is seen as dangerous because he or she will want to control you." Miller points out that in terms of human development, this is not a valid or healthy definition of power. Real confidence in oneself and real power for oneself have the opposite effect. They reduce the need to have power over others or to control them. It is important for women to hold fast to this healthy definition of power and to understand that we do not need to diminish other women or men in order to assert our own strength. Now, this book is about spirituality for women, so that's why it is speaking mostly in those terms. But this is something that absolutely applies to anyone and not just the binary genders. It's this idea that the way our overarching society views power is whether or not you control something or whether or not you have power over something. And this other view that is your own personal power from within, and the more powerful you realize you are, the less likely you are to feel the need to control other things in your environment because you're secure in your power. So the reason this links to experience for me is that I was reading some other things lately that unfortunately I can't quote for you. I think it was just comments online and things like that that's just reminding me of this overall thing that we see over and over, or at least I do. And it's this idea that we talk about paganism and related spiritual paths like this, whatever your spiritual path is. Sometimes they're considered more new agey, sometimes they're more neo-pagan, whatever it is. It comes up a lot in my communities online and discussions of things like this, spiritual paths like this, where we talk about it as a path of experience, and that we believe things that we experience, we are changed by things we experience, certain things that come naturally to us are due to our experience, or, we're good at things based on what we've experienced in the past, etc. So there's this idea that it's a religion of experience. And we often are trying to think of the word here. We often are reassuring people or encouraging people that your experience matters and your personal experience is very important. For example, if a book tells you to do something a certain way and you try that out and it's just really not energetically working for you, you are free to try another way. The way that you experience the thing matters. It can be helpful when teachers have tried it over and over and a lot of people agree on a certain way of doing things. If you don't know where to begin, going with what a lot of people say has worked for them is probably a good place for you to start and try it out. But it's not something that you have to follow word for word if it really doesn't work for you. So that's one example of how we talk about your experience matters. But also things like having discussions about areas of life that are not part of everyone else's individual experience. So we might be working for a certain cause, but some of the people working toward that cause have never personally experienced it, in which case the experience of the people who have gone through that is extremely important and valid and is being empowered in that space and being able to share that experience with other people. It doesn't mean that the other people have then had that experience or fully understand it as though they had lived it, but it's very important to be able to work together, and that's sort of a little bit of that power with and having knowledge of other people's experience. And that's something that I think we promote a lot in the YouTube community on Pagan Perspective with, if I don't know something, I might know someone who has been through that and they might be able to give you advice kind of thing. So that's the kind of way that I view when we talk about this is a religion of experience. Those are the things that I think about, that your experience is valid and the experience of other people in the community are valid, and bringing those all together gives us a fuller idea, if not firsthand experience, of what the entire group's experience is, or the entire world's, depending on who is sharing. But there's this other way that people can take the idea that your experience matters. And I've also seen this come up in the community several times recently, and also in other communities, but it's happened here too. The other way that you can take the affirmation that your experience is valid is to assume that your experience is the most valid, or is the only valid experience, or is more valid than other people's experiences. And that gets back to the power over idea. It's this idea that when someone tells you your experience is valid, you think they're saying only your experience is valid, which is not the case. But that is a way that a lot of people are operating. And that's how we get things like people saying that story that you just shared about your personal lived experience must be a lie, or it must be made up or exaggerated, or that it's not valid within this space because I've never experienced it. I think on a very basic level, we understand that that doesn't make sense, because even before I've ever flown in a plane, I know that other people have flown in planes and that that is an experience that exists. Before I ever drove a car, I saw many, many people driving cars. I did not know what that experience was like from a first-hand perspective, but I know that that experience exists, and when people tell me what it's like to drive a car, I know that that experience is valid for them. It might be different by the time I get behind the wheel of a car and start experiencing it my way. On the other hand, it might be very similar. But even if it is different, it's okay to have different experiences of the same thing. Everyone is different. We come at things from different angles. When someone tells you your experience is valid, there are pretty much two different ways that you can go with that. There may be more, but there's at least two that I think of. One is to think that they're saying only your experience is valid. The other is to say, if my experience is valid, then the experience of everyone else must also be valid and vital to them. This also reminds me of the practice that was begun by the Church of All Worlds of affirming to people, remember thou art God, remember thou art goddess. If someone tells you you're God, you can either take that and say, well, I'm God. And if you believe in a power over structure, you would say, well, I'm God. All the rest of you are not. Therefore, I'm the most important and most powerful. But then the other way of seeing that is to step back and notice, yes, someone just affirmed to me, thou art goddess, or thou art God. But then watching as around the room they do the same to everyone else, and realizing that that divine spark and that quality exists in everyone. Certain people on their path take the assertion that your experience is valid as meaning theirs is the most valid. Others see it as meaning that if my experience is valid, so is yours. But the assertion that other people's lived experiences are not valid because someone else has not experienced them is inaccurate and also very harmful. I bring this up, and I've been thinking about this a lot, not only because of the general climate of the world right now, but because I have personally gotten several comments recently from people going back in my old videos and some of them on newer videos talking about how I'm making things up because that problem doesn't exist. Why? Because they haven't experienced it. And that's just absurd, because when there are hundreds and thousands and millions of other people for whom that is their experience, telling you that that's their experience is absurd to say that that is not a problem because you haven't experienced it. And I will tell you right now that in the past, and still with certain things, and as they're coming up, I'm realizing, oh, this is the same thing. I have done that, and I am recognizing now more and more how that is harmful. And I plan to do another video addressing those things specifically, but there are definitely things where when other people are sharing their experience, we are tempted to say, but in my experience, this, but not just as a way of sharing another view, but in a way that is meant to shut down whatever that person just told you. And it is harmful. And I think that it's awesome when you can have a mutually respectful discussion, but often that has to happen one-on-one or in small groups. It's very difficult to do that kind of thing in the public comments section on YouTube, because then it's all about like calling people out and people jump on one side or the other or the third side, whatever. There could be multiple angles. People tend to gang up on things, and then everyone's just defensive, and that's not how things work. So I've actually recently been doing a lot of talking one-on-one with people who are part of different groups that I'm in online, and maybe when something comes up that we're kind of upset by, or we're like, you're really not considering this other angle when you said this thing, we will message privately and work it out privately. And it's been amazing just realizing that we do have so much in common, and oftentimes, this is not true of all people, but oftentimes the people in my communities online are not trying to be mean, and they're not trying to be jerks. They really just don't know, or it's just this way of we don't think of how we're saying things. Or it's just a perspective that we've never considered before. And so we don't mean to exclude it, but if it's never been presented to us, we may not know to think of it until someone brings it up. Numerous people on my channel have been adding in their perspectives on some things I've been talking about, and it's been like this, oh, I didn't think of that, thank you moment, and I appreciate that so much. So I just wanted to make this video about experience and different definitions of power, just to kind of get you thinking, not to go into depth of any of the specifics of how I've experienced it, but just because it's something that's been coming up a lot. I think it is very relevant to other things that are going on in the world, and it is very relevant to my spiritual path, as not only it just came up in this book that I'm reading, but the reclaiming tradition is something that is very important to me that I've been learning more and more about, and Starhawk teaches a lot about power over, power with, power from within, that kind of thing in her writings, and obviously it comes up in the teachings of the tradition as well. So I think it's something that may be important to a lot of you, and if not, it might just be something interesting, something to think about, because I think a lot of us aren't mind readers, and we might not always know to think of something before it's presented to us. But when it has been, I think it's very important to attempt to bring that in to your worldview and have not necessarily adopt it, but to have a conversation with it and see how it changes your views and experience, if at all. It may not always. Sometimes people give me comments that are, from their experience, this criticism of me. And I may take that and sit with that and examine it and say, okay, have I done this? Am I doing this? Am I being this? And you may realize that, whoa, yeah, I missed something there. Thank you for pointing that out. Or on the other hand, you may look at it and say, this really just seems to be another example of someone being a hater for no reason. They may be trying to dismiss me by saying this, and so sometimes you may decide that someone's comments aren't valid to your experience. There are a lot of times that I have had that experience online too, believe me, but there have also been a lot of the other where I'm like, oh, thank you for saying that, and now I need to adjust something, and I may need to sit with it a little bit longer, but it's just nice to know that we're always evolving and changing. And anyway, I just want to leave you with that. So experience and definitions of power, Cakes for the Queen of Heaven, Shirley and Ranck, The Spiral Dance by Starhawk, many, many others. So thank you for watching, thank you for listening. Until I see you next time, don't forget to be awesome, blessed be, and goodbye.